Hello, and welcome to Module 2, Considering Learning Styles in Mentoring. Take a moment to reflect. How do you learn best? Do you know what your preferred learning style is? Do you tend to teach others with strategies that have worked to help you learn? When mentoring, knowing the preferred learning style of the mentee can provide insight into how best to structure the mentoring and learning experience. It can also provide the mentor with insight into the mentee as they establish and nurture the mentoring relationship. There are many learning style inventories available, but for this module we will focus on two that are well represented in the literature. By the end of this module, participants will be able to articulate the importance of knowing a learner's preferred learning style and describe the role learning styles play in the learning process. Define a learning space and name the characteristics of a learning space that facilitates learning, and apply either the Kolb Learning Style Inventory or the Index of Learning Styles in a clinical mentoring partnership. The idea of learning through doing and learning from our experiences is a logical, theoretical foundation for mentoring in a clinical setting. Experiential learning theory was spearheaded by David Kolb in 1984. Kolb defined learning as a continuous process that individuals cycle through across the lifespan. In experiential learning theory, learning is considered as a process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. Learning occurs as the result of synergistic transactions between the person and their environment. Learning is a holistic, lifelong process of adapting to and interacting with the world. Kolb's learning cycle is a recurring process of an individual's interaction with their internal thought processes and their experiences with the world around them. Concrete experience is the first part of the learning cycle. This represents what we feel. Essentially, it is the event or what happened. For example, a client comes into the clinic with a distal radius fracture. This is the concrete experience. We are presented with a problem or an event. This takes us to the next part of the learning cycle, reflective observation. At this part of the cycle, we are watching and reasoning through our experience. In the clinical scenario, this is the evaluation process of learning how to treat the patient with the distal radius fracture. This not only includes the evaluation of the client and their injury, but also looking at the anatomy, treatment protocols, looking at x-rays, considering the structures involved, etc. Once we have observed the injury and reflected on how that impacts the client, we must move to the next part of the learning cycle, abstract conceptualization. At this stage, we are thinking through what we have experienced, reflected upon, and observed, and we begin making sense of it. At this stage, we begin to develop ideas. Again, in the clinical scenario, in this phase of the learning cycle, we are beginning to formulate ideas about why the client is presenting with wrist stiffness, finger stiffness, weakness, and limited function. As we develop ideas, we then move to the final stage in the learning cycle, active experimentation. In this phase, we are formulating our plan and determining what we need to do next. At this point in our clinical scenario, we formulate and implement our treatment plan. As we do this, we are presented with a new concrete experience and the cycle starts over. Let's return to our clinical scenario of a client who has had a distal radius fracture. For this example, we have begun to implement treatment, but our client experiences increased pain and edema following the planned interventions. We now have another concrete experience, and we must adapt and therefore go through the cycle again, thereby also continuing through the learning process. According to the experiential learning theory, learning does not take place until we have gone through each part of the cycle in sequence. We can, however, start anywhere in the cycle, but for learning to be complete, we must go through each aspect of the cycle and go in order. The way you learn determines how you live, making decisions, solving problems, changing, collaborating, innovating, and improving. Assessment of each individual's learning style or process is the first step to understanding how to create effective learning experiences for the novice therapist. Influenced by the experiential learning theory, Kolb developed the Kolb Learning Style Inventory. The most recent version, version 4.0, is now named the Kolb Experiential Learning Profile, or the KELP. The KELP was developed as a self-reflection tool to assist learners in gaining a better understanding of themselves through their individual preferences in approaching an ideal learning experience. The KELP is an online assessment that takes about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. An individual assessment costs $35 and can be found at the Experiential Learning website. You can scan the QR code on the slide to get more information on the KELP. Each learning style represents a combination of preferences for certain regions of the learning cycle. Individuals who have an initiating learning style learn best in the active experimentation and concrete experience parts of the learning cycle. Those who have an experiencing style use a combination of concrete experience, active experimentation, and reflective observation. All of the different learning styles in this learning profile are combinations of different parts and preferences for parts of the learning cycle. You can look more into this profile on their website if you would like to go more in depth into these different types of learning styles. Another learning style inventory is called the Index of Learning Styles. This inventory was influenced by the experiential learning theory and developed by Richard Felder and Barbara Solomon at North Carolina State University. The ILS is a 44-question learning style inventory that takes less than 10 minutes to complete. Once complete, a learning style profile and explanation is provided. It is free to use and can be found at the NCSU website, and you can scan this QR code here for a link to that Index of Learning Styles. Active learners in this learning inventory tend to retain and understand information best by doing. Reflective learners prefer to think about it quietly first. Active learners tend to like group work better than reflective learners who typically prefer to work alone. Sensing learners tend to like learning facts. Intuitive learners often prefer discovering possibilities in relationships. Sensors tend to be more practical and careful than those that are intuitors. And intuitors tend to work faster and to be more innovative than sensors. Again, you can go into this learning style inventory online for more in-depth information. In order for learning to occur and for full engagement in all 4 areas of the learning cycle, a learning space must be present. According to the experiential learning theory, there are 5 dimensions of a learning space. The psychological dimension consists of an individual's learning style, their skills, and their values. The social dimension consists of the learner's peers, mentors, teachers, and members of the community. The institutional dimension consists of policy, organizational goals, and traditions. The cultural dimension consists of values, norms, history, and language. The physical dimension consists of clinic settings, architecture, and environment. For optimal learning to take place, the learning environment should be welcoming, hospitable, safe, supportive, and challenging. As mentors, we have an opportunity to create a space that is conducive to facilitating the learning process. By providing a framework, learning style inventories and questionnaires can foster a conversation among learners and educators about how to create the most effective learning environments and spaces. Critics of heavy reliance on learning styles note that they are not always reliable indicators of learning strengths and weaknesses. It is important to note that learning style profiles suggest behavioral tendencies. They are not perfect predictors of behavior. They are merely a tool to provide both the mentor and the mentee information to further strengthen the mentoring partnership and the learning experience. Remember, learning is a lifelong process. This process is made up of learning styles or preferences, the learning environment, and the knowledge required for mastery of a concept or skill. When mentoring new therapists, each concept we teach them should serve to enhance the learning process. In essence, the process itself is the ultimate outcome. Thank you for your attention and participation. Here are the references for this module. We'll see you in Module 3.